Everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies and Greg Nagy and Sarah is joining us. We're here for HeroesX Office Hours, version 10 of HeroesX, and hours 7 and 8. Our discussion questions are, for hour 7, if no pictures had survived showing Achilles, would you think differently about this hero? And for 8, have the pictures showing Patroklos complicated, or have they simplified your understanding of this hero? I love those. If no pictures
we've been looking a lot at images of the vase paintings in particular.
Yes.
And certainly speaking personally, that absolutely blew me away, because before that, Greek vases had just been, well, Greek vases. I hadn't thought about them as depicting anything.
Yes.
So I'm looking at some of the responses from our participants in their discussion of these questions. I think one of the themes that's coming up is that, just as we were talking about last week, that lyric was giving us a more rounded perspective. For some people in particular, I think the images have given another perspective, another way of thinking about, another way of looking at both heroes, actually.
I love that way of saying it. It's great.
And rounding out is really a beautiful way for Sarah to capture what's on the minds of people. I like that a lot. Yeah.
I like that vases are round also. So
they are round.
Basic level to that.
And I love the fact that art historians talk about a rollout, which is what happens when you try to imagine the strip that goes around, just flattened. Rollout.
Do you want to get into any specifics, Sarah, of the things that we have on the discussion board?
Mm-hmm. So one of the participants was mentioning, perhaps reading the texts, we can think about a lot of these heroes as being like Achilles and Patroklos, for that matter, as being like young, in their prime, and he's drawing a connection with maybe sportsmen in our own time.
Mm-hmm.
But also saying that perhaps the way that the vase paintings depict people doesn't quite square with maybe our perceptions of what a young athletic person might look like. So we have to, as it were, learn the grammar, as it were, of vase painting as well.
Yes, that's so true. And one example would be that in some of the vase paintings, the person who drives the chariot is wearing an ankle-length charioteer's robe. But in other representations, the driver of the chariot is armed like a warrior with the breastplate and shin guards, whatever. So there's one instance where the myth-ritual dichotomy blurs, and I expect this dichotomy to blur, because the older I get, the more I see myth as simply an aspect of ritual. It's ritualized verbal behavior as opposed to just ritualized behavior per se. So I see it more as a subcategory. Another example, I think, of a kind of fusion between athlete and hero is what we see staring right at us from the Boston Hydria, where first you think, well, this is an athletic event. This is a snapshot of an athletic event, or maybe a composite snapshot. But then there's the corpse of Hector. And I'm fascinated with how in some of these vase paintings, that corpse is so incongruous that it is even, shall we say, out of place of the normal frame. So you have to kind of look to the left of the thing. Oh, there's the corpse outside the central image, and the dragging of the corpse of Hector is in no way an athletic activity, but it's certainly a mythological moment that is related to the ritual of athleticism, but it's not something that athletes do in the here and now, obviously. People don't have chariot races and drag corpses behind their chariots. That is just so incongruous. And the modern mind will then forget about the athletics and think only of the myth, or vice versa.
Right. So mixing that we see.
Yeah.
So another thing that participants are talking about in terms of the what's going on here, and in some of the paintings, we see that moment where Iris maybe stops what's going on, or perhaps a little further on in the sequence where Achilles is actually looking down at the body of Hector. Is there some sort of realization going on there? Or isn't there? Is this depicting something that comes across in the text, or isn't there?
I'm so glad you picked up on those observations, dear Sarah. I think the more I look at those things, the more I see a level of contemplation, and that's accompanied by the fact that in some of these pictures, the horses, the 4-horse team that pulls the chariot is no longer in motion. The horses had already stopped. And I can think of one particular instance where, as Achilles is looking down at the body of Hector, it's clear that there is no dragging of the corpse anymore, because the horses are just standing there, not racing, as in other snapshots. Whenever I say snapshot, of course, I don't mean a snapshot of one action. It's a kind of a layered snapshot with several different things going on, superimposed one on top of the other.
Double exposure.
Oh, I like that, yes. Double, triple, quadruple, yeah.
Yes, because they seem to incorporate quite a number of stages compared to what we have in the text. We've already got a Sema there, and yet in our Iliad, he's dragging the corpse maybe before that point or after that point. We've got a charioteer, and yet in the text it sounds as if Achilles himself is driving the chariot.
Yeah.
We've got as you say, in some cases we've got him looking forwards, in some cases looking backwards. It's kind of capturing all of those things, but in different ways. But one thing I wanted to just maybe also pick up on is whether we can see these as separate from the text, part of the same tradition, or some people are maybe thinking, is it illustrating the text that we have, or is it illustrating something different?
Yes, and dear Sarah, you know how I would answer that one, because from everything I can see, it's not inspired by any one text. And it's more likely to be inspired by it. I mean the visual art representations. It seems to be inspired by storytelling in all its variations, and it's almost as if the visual arts are aware of variations as well as one given version or another version. What would be a good example? Again, I think of the Boston Hydria. When you see Priam and Hecuba over on your left, situated in a porch, in a portico, that just doesn't square with anything that you would expect in Homeric Iliad, where they're on the high walls of Troy, looking down on the field of battle, on the theater of war. Some interpreters would describe it, because this part of the area surrounding Troy was very flat because of the silting of the Scamander River, and was ideal for chariot warfare. But the Iliadic view, as for example, when Andromache sees the dragging of the body of Hector, is from high up on the walls and looking down, not looking from a porch. So there are all sorts of indications where the visual art and the way you visualize in visual art dominates. And I just don't see a kind of point-for-point textual referencing. I can see audio and video interacting. That's fine. And even there, I would say that the performance in verbal art must precede any of the visualizations that we see. Sometimes what dictates the visualization is the medium itself. It is the curvature of the vase. Here's an example. When you look at the shoulder of the Boston Hydria, where there's a chariot battle between Heracles on the left and Kypnos, son of Ares, on the right, and you seem to have Zeus on foot somewhere in the middle. And that again can only work with the curvature, because as you see the picture painted on a curve, in a way, what would be two chariots heading in one direction from a purely flat point of view, from a curved point of view, is two chariots coming at each other from two different directions. So I see a lot of conditioning by way of limitations of space. And I think of Goethe's wonderful expression about a true artist finding himself or herself within the framework of limitations. And verbal art has its limitations, visual art has its limitations. And if I can go back to the basic question, is, has this changed your view of Achilles? In your imagination? I would say in some ways it hasn't. For example, I can't think of an example of a bearded Achilles in the chariot scenes, but certainly in other scenes, as when Achilles kills the Amazon Penthesilea, which is of course not in our Iliad. There he's bearded, and it's okay with me, because if there's a juxtaposition of Achilles as a potential lover of an Amazon, I think the beard would suit him better than a pre-bearded look where he's not yet, so to speak, eligible. Well, eligible for what? You can't say that he's eligible for marriage in that case, but certainly eligible for adult love versus adolescent love. How's that?
Another participant's picked up on this interaction with the deities, and you were mentioning Zeus in the echoes of Boston Hydria, and we see that the interaction here mainly with Iris, I think, in most of them, as a message. And the comment is something like seeing Achilles in awe of a god seems to make him more human.
Yeah.
As a way of changing perception, because as we know, in earlier parts of the reading, maybe people have seen Achilles as being perhaps a little bit in a negative way, perhaps being very, very hard, very unfeeling.
I see that kind of human. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really reluctant to follow anyone's instructions, even the gods. It's like, well, if you say so, I'll do it. But I don't want to. But since it's Zeus telling me to do it, I'll do it.
Wow.
But I was
Yeah.
thinking that he does interact with his mother, who's also a goddess. And that is in quite a sort of sympathetic depiction, I think, in the text. But then, you know, we also have this idea of Achilles perhaps being so in throes of his rage that he is not sympathetic as a character. And so, you know, that's just different ways of perceiving them, as indeed the lyric did.
He gets described as iron quite a bit. He's not a human. He's just a piece of metal.
Yes. It's, well, but you know, it's like the Hesiodic works and days where you can see the bronze men as a very one-sided view of unemotional, well, I shouldn't say unemotional, because they certainly had anger and hatred, but maybe, how should I say it, unloving and unwelcoming personalities.
I think I should have said bronze.
What did I say?
Iron.
No, but you could say iron too, because sometimes he's compared to an inflexibly iron-like personality. No, that's fine. I've learned the big difference between iron and bronze from a great sinologist, Michael Puett. Basically, bronze is aristocratic and it's made for few elite warriors. Iron is mass-produced and it's made for the huge conquering armies. That's the difference. And of course, in that case, Bronze Age comes before Iron Age, but iron is already there in the Bronze Age as a precious metal. And people haven't figured out how to mass produce it.
Right, it's one of the prizes in the funeral games, isn't it? It's
exactly, in the funeral games, it's like some precious metal.
Yeah, so it's sort of, oh, here's a wonderful present. Oh, piece of iron, thanks. But if it's got value, then that makes more sense of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we're looking at the second question, the one about Patroklos. And again, I think people have been given this quite a bit of thought and they're trying to think about it different ways. And one of the things that they're thinking about is maybe this illustrates or exemplifies, as it were, part of the function, if you like, of Patroklos. Almost more than his character, because we've been talking earlier about in previous discussions about his character being more sympathetic and compared to Achilles. But here he's a psūkhē. He's now depicted in terms of his function initially to impel Achilles to then go back to battle, but then also in additional terms, perhaps, which maybe we can go and talk about in a minute.
I love the fact that in those vase paintings we study, I noticed that when I use compounds, it's vase paintings, but then I try to say vase just to be a little bit more fancy when I use the non-compound. In any case, still I say the vase paintings. I love the fact that you can either have Patroklos labeled as Patroklos, and we see that in the Boston Hydria, or in the Münster Hydria labeled as psūkhē. And I just can't get over that. That is so mystical that Patroklos is psūkhē. Well, he can't be labeled as Achilles because Achilles is running next to the chariot. So that takes care of Achilles. So why psūkhē? It's as if they only had one psūkhē to share. just as they have only one tomb to share. How's that for twinning or bonding or what Freud would call the presence of an alter ego? Whether in some moments it's the kinder, gentler Achilles, whereas in other moments it might be a healer, called heroes after all are healers. I'm just fascinated with the Münster Hydria and the nomenclature of psūkhē. And I love to say to people, this is the earliest picture of a psyche. That's a teasing way of saying that if we think of all the ways we use derivatives of the ancient Greek words, psychology, psychiatric, even psyche, here you have a picture of it, and it's dated, I don't know, some people say more like 510, others more like 520. I'm not willing to go even earlier. But there it is. First attestation of a picture of a psyche. How's that for being provocative?
I think it's another way of, as it were, illustrating that the images don't necessarily square exactly with what we have in the text, because the psūkhē is very small, it's a little homunculus,
Yeah.
and yet the figure of Patroklos when he appears to Achilles in the dream is life-size, which he's not expecting.
I love that. And Achilles himself is surprised as, wow, you're life-size. I didn't expect that kind of a ghost.
Maybe he did expect a little homunculus.
Yeah, I think he probably did. And certainly when you look at comparative evidence, like what we see in Indic epic, it should be a Tom Thumb size version of the self. That's what you see in Indic traditions.
And in some of them, he's sort of got wings, hasn't he?
Oh yes, the little fluttering wings, and certainly I think in all the paintings he is miniaturized. It's never life-size the way he is in the Iliad. So how can we say that this is based on the text? It's so not based on the text.
It all just comes out of the same matrix.
Oh, I like your word matrix. Yes, because these arts, both the visual arts and the verbal arts, have to recognize the reality of variance. Every valley has its own variation on a theme when it comes to important matters like Achilles.
Patroklos is a butterfly. Is that what?
Am
I going to get in trouble if I say
no,
that?
you're not.
Once you see a butterfly, it's really hard to catch once it escapes.
Well, either a butterfly or a moth, but a clear distinction. Okay, but here's something. When you go to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and I can just see it. You enter the Mycenaean collection, especially the parts that were found in Grave Circle A, and there are stylized scales, and on the scales, which were buried, it's gold foil buried with the dead, were little weights, but they're so delicate that they're like butterflies, and they have butterflies or moths represented on the surface of these weights. So when you think about the Iliadic moment, the so-called psychostasia, the weighing of the psyches, on one end is Hector's, on the other end is Achilles's. In the back of your mind, you think about, oh, it's as light as a butterfly. And in other Mediterranean cultures too, for example, in Egyptian traditions, you have the idea of the weighing of, okay, I'll use an anachronistic word, the weighing of souls, and by way of scales. And I talk a lot about that in a commentary that we're not actively asking our participants to read, but it's the one that you edit with some colleagues, Keith. It's called A Sampling of Comments on the Iliad and the Odyssey. And there I have, I think, an interesting routine about the weighing of a psyche, which is a light thing because it's not weighed down by materiality. I could go on and on about this, but I think you see what the basic message is again, you see something that is comparable in the verbal art of the Iliad, and then you see the goldsmith's art of these beautiful decorations that are buried with the dead, and which clearly have to do with some kind of presupposition of an existence after the everyday life that we lead. So it's there. And again, what you have in the material culture doesn't correspond in any way as if there was some kind of derivation process from what we hear in the verbal art of the Iliad.
I think the other big thing that has come out from what people have been posting is that it helped them almost by looking at these visual depictions of Patroklos, it kind of reinforced or reminded them or helped them further understand that bond and connection between Achilles and Patroklos.
I love it. Maybe dear Sarah, you could wind things up for us. So what is our takeaway as you see it?
Well, I think the takeaway from both questions is that it's helped people to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation, and to make additional connections both with Achilles and with Patroklos.
I love it. This has been such a wonderful discussion, and thank you so much, Sarah and Keith.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Always good to talk to you. All right, we're going to sign off for now. Until next time.
Till the next time.
Hours.
Yeah.
10.
Bye.